I was the only one on deck. I was steering. I shouted out, and my mother was immediately on deck. We saw the light, and then we saw that it was a Coast Guard boat.
They kept coming until they were on top of us.
And the wind came out of our sail, so we suddenly started to stop dead in the water.
They were over us. The people on their deck thought they had rammed into us and were waiting for the crash.
And my father was really scared.
And that's when we thought, this is it. Whatever's going to happen, it's about to happen.
Underwater, approximately depth of 20 to 25 feet. The vessel is laying on its starboard side, getting a good shot of the rail. Looking down at some of the planks, there's an opening. One of the planks is popped. That's the deck. There's a hatch.
I realize now what I didn't then. As a child growing up on it, I knew that I was having the biggest adventure ever, that it was totally unique. It was a childhood that was unparalleled and unsurpassed. I totally appreciated that. But I didn't have the bigger perspective that the boat itself, for many reasons, is something which needs to be restored and kept in its place in history. It needs to be visible. It needs to be tangible.
We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won.
In 1951, my father, Earle Reynolds, was teaching physical anthropology at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. His specialty was the growth and development of children. My mother, Barbara Reynolds, was the wife and mother of 3 and wrote children's books. Our parents had no interest in politics at that time.
When I was about 12, I and my family went to Japan. We went to a city that we hadn't heard of before, that I hadn't heard of before, in South Japan, named Hiroshima.
My father was one of the top 5 experts on the effects of radiation on the human body at that time. He was chosen by the Atomic Energy Commission to study 4,800 children for 3 years, how they developed cancers, they developed thyroid problems, they developed autoimmune diseases because of the radiation.
You know, what I found is that he was transformed by this work. He came to understand that the work he was doing was being weaponized in some way, that the knowledge that was coming from it, from these living people, these very damaged people that he was interacting with, that this could be used for the development of future weapons that would be much more powerful. And that's when something clicked in him.
He'd read a book called Sailing Alone Around the World by Joshua Slocum when he was a kid.
And then he said, I am going to sail around the world the way I've always wanted to. And his wife, who was my mother, said, alone? He said, that's what I was planning. And she said, well, she was a gentlewoman, so she didn't say, the hell with that. But she did make it known that no way was he going without her.
Out of this unprepossessing shipyard, well, it wasn't even a shipyard, just this flat place with a little ramshackle cabin on it next to the inland sea, where this sampan builder was trying to rebuild his life after World War II.
These people were used to building fishing boats, and very sturdy ones for heavy seas, but they had no idea of what a yacht was supposed to be. So they said, well, you give us the plans of a boat, and we'll build it for you. He found a boat he liked, Colin Archer ketch, 50 feet long. He got the blueprints, he finagled them a bit to his own satisfaction.
I think there were 3 interpreters involved altogether, one that knew English but not nautical terms, one that knew nautical terms but not English.
And said, how long did it take to build this? And Bill said, a year. Actually, it took 3 years.
And it was beautifully made, beautiful woods, and elegantly made with no power tools at all. One little man that hand sawed each log, all the planks. And others, they put them in, they were naturally curved, and they were all put in from the top.
My mother was also much into experiencing Japan and the country and how the people live.
And she wanted to meet the people, and she took us kids out there. These people were dirt poor, they were so poor, trying to struggle back in an economy that had been shattered. Just being in a different culture started to bring out what was inside, the real person that was inside her. The phoenix is a bird in Japanese mythology that appears only in time of universal peace. In Western mythology, it's a bird which rises from the ashes of its own burning. And if that's not the definition and the symbolism of Hiroshima, then nothing is.
The time came.
There were maybe 100 people with streamers.
The boat was launched and it went racing into the ocean. It moved off across the water of the inland sea.
This was only 9 years after our two countries had been at war with each other. And yet we were sailing together with 3 local Japanese yachtsmen, Motosada Fushima, Niichi Mikami, and Mitsugi, Suemitsu, and a cat. And doing it in harmony, it was magic. You wake up every morning and you look out to see where you are. Sometimes you're at sea and sometimes you're coming into port.
And we were surrounded by Papeete in Tahiti, or Samoa, or Fiji, or New Zealand.
And then you go ashore and you see all kinds of people.
And we studied up on the next place we were going to go to, but you also find the pleasure, the joy of skimming along. The wind picks up a little bit and there's a color of the waves changes from blue to white, and then you start moving a little faster, and it's nice. I had, as Homer says, many people and countries and the way that they lived. I had spoken with people that had completely different ways of thinking and of living, and perhaps very importantly, had completely different ideas of my country, of America. This was my education. I went to South Africa, where I could see the terrible situation that the blacks there were under. We stopped in the United States on the way on.
My dad's book was supposed to be published in 1954, the results of his findings of those 3 years. It was suppressed.
The study on the effect of radiation on the growth of the children in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was classified so high that he was not allowed to look at it. Boy, if I ever saw him furious.
2 of our 3 yachtsmen, Mickey and Moto, flew back to Japan from the Canal Zone. Nick Mikami stayed with us, stayed with the boat. Once we were back in the Pacific, we were so eager to get home. And home to us was Hawaii. It had been 3.5 years. I'd started as a kid, and now I was a teenager. We were really ready for some R&R before we went back to Japan. The day before, we reached Ala Wai Harbor again, having come full circle. Another boat, a smaller boat, the Golden Rule, had made news, local news, by leaving Hawaii to go into the nuclear test zone in the Pacific to protest these weapons. Between the time they left San Pedro and the time they arrived in Honolulu, the American government had had time to make that area, 390,000 square miles of open ocean, off limits to American citizens. They were immediately stopped by the Coast Guard and brought back, and the captain was put in jail. We didn't know anything about it except that they were right down the dock from us, and there were 4 men aboard whom people said were Quakers. We had not exactly an idea of what that meant, but these men changed our lives because of what they didn't do, what they couldn't do.
They were about to have a trial. We went to the courthouse to listen. and were tremendously affected by what they said.
These men were groundbreaking.
We were so impressed by them, their integrity and their commitment to do something to put their lives in harm's way for the sake really of the whole world.
When we got back to the boat, sat down and said, should we do something about this? When you meet someone like Burt Bigelow, you say, how can a person be like that? And when you meet three of them, Huntington and Willoughby and Bigelow, right? And Orion I leave apart because he was much younger than the others, and he was like me. Good Lord. I had the other role model, my father.
Our government had been given the Marshall Islands as a trust territory. And what we did was we moved them off of the islands they lived on. We exploded weapons which would irradiate their home islands for generations, for thousands of years to come. So the issue of the morality of what was our government was doing to the Marshall Islanders was a big issue. These things, these terrible, destructive things are going to blow our world apart, and we've got to stop it.
All these things were coming together that seemed to be completely apart, like a puzzle which looks like pieces of a different puzzle and then begins to become one thing.
And at no point did any of the crew members of the Golden Rule say, if we can't go, would you consider going, or would you take over? Fresh, it was all internal, coming to realize may need to have a role in it. We had a Japanese crew member on board too, and he was one of the family, and said, what do you think, Nick? And it was just a no-brainer, it was a given. I'm from Hiroshima.
Well, I was maybe taught that it was an accident, but if it was an accident, it was an accident the universe pointing a finger at you.
They wanted to leave me in Hawaii, and I said I have a right to fight for my country and fight for my world.
My mother, I think, it intensified her belief that there's a guiding hand. There's something like God. My father thought, it's a damn shame, but it's so completely rational. You know it's rational. You know you got to do this.
The whole Golden Rule crew is in jail. We are pushing the envelope as far as just the trip back to Japan. We have to leave soon.
We agreed among ourselves that the final decision would not be made until we reached the line.
It was the day my dad had determined that we would leave. What had been a pleasure trip for 3.5 years was something much more sober. There was a certain amount of fear associated with what might happen, but for the immediate moment, it was just getting ready for another trip.
Cast off the lines, and we're out of Ala Wai Harbor, and we're heading for and we are watching to see whether there's any government boats following us, and there weren't.
The first 3 weeks were trade winds. It was just like we were back at sea in the pleasure cruise. We enjoyed the moonlight and the flying fish and the dolphins. It was just like a normal trip. My dad's taken aboard all the books to read about the issues. He was taking into consideration, I will never get another job in my field. I will no longer be called Dr. Earle Reynolds. I'm putting my family at risk. What's going to happen to the boat? Because he was a man of courage and he saw these guys doing what and being forbidden to do what needed to be done, he, in a sense, I'm sure had some sense, we're going to have to do this. The main question was, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to us? All the possibilities. And we're a family. I mean, what threat can we possibly be to them?
These are the words my father wrote in his book, The Forbidden Voyage. Tonight in the cockpit, Barbara and I had a long talk. The time has come for us to make a decision. Do we enter the zone or do we go around? I looked out from the security of our little floating world to the utter darkness all around us. There was a soft rain about us now, falling on us and on all the people in the world. A rain silent, invisible, undetectable by any human sense. A deadly rain. I thought of the poem Ted had written in the style of a Japanese haiku. How can I believe this soft rain that I so love, radioactive? Have we any choice? No, I said, no choice. There was a sound in the darkness, and Nick had joined us in the cockpit. Don't you know? Haven't you decided? He seemed angry. Yes, Nick, we've decided. Good, he said.
I was the only one on deck. I was steering. I shouted out, and my mother was immediately on deck. We saw the light, and then we saw that it was a Coast Guard boat.
They kept coming until they were on top of us.
And the wind came out of our sails, so we suddenly started to stop dead in the water.
They were over us. The people on their deck thought they had rammed into us and were waiting for the crash.
And my father was really scared.
And that's when we thought, this is it. Whatever's going to happen, it's about to happen. At that point, they backed off slightly, thank God. They spoke to us. The words were being carried off. They quoted regulations. And were we intending to enter that zone? My dad said yes. At that point, they fell back, they thanked us, and tailed us all night, all the next day.
It was weird. It was weird. It was almost like being the mouse. The mouse can only go this speed. They are in control of the situation, but whenever they want that mouse, they're on you.
For the second time, came up to us again the next evening.
Are you going into the zone? And we said yes.
They just warned us this time that we were just 7 miles from entering that zone. They fell back.
They were following us as we crossed the line.
My dad said something like, this must be about where it is. I think we're crossing, we have crossed the line, right about now. But we thought there is a confrontation coming. It's getting closer because now we've actually broken the law. Followed us until we were 65 miles within the zone, according to our dead reckoning, before they pulled up alongside.
And they said, we are going to put a couple of men on board who have a warrant for Dr. Reynolds' arrest. And they said, we have to sail to Kwajalein, which is in the Marshall Islands, but just outside of the demarcated no-entry zone. My father had to make decisions about whether this was the moment to protest or not, but they said that either he sailed it himself or a crew would come and take over and sail the boat. And so we sailed it ourselves.
After this journey around the world, obviously Reynolds, his family, everyone involved in this was transformed. Having done this journey, as these tests were happening, left Reynolds with a very powerful choice to try and take action. The action that Reynolds and Bigelow were involved in was sailing into the test site, which was a new tactic. And emerging from all this He seemed to be very encouraged about having taken this action, and it seems to really clearly have led him to undertake, further activist stances.
3 years after we sailed into the Pacific nuclear test zone, the USSR started testing atmospheric weapons again.
We've made our protest against the United States nuclear weapons, and we said from the beginning we were against all nuclear weapons testing, not just the United States. Many, many people came even from distant cities to wish us well.
For that reason, too, the Phoenix became the means by which something significant was able to be done to protest nuclear testing.
He got involved in several other projects, all of which involved sailing. One was to deliver medical supplies to North Vietnam.
And then he loaned it to us to sail it again, going to North Vietnam also. I wanted to put my life on the line for peace. I was only on the Phoenix from August to January, but that little bit of time changed my life, and the rest of my life has been dramatically affected and influenced by that. God knows we've got enough symbols of wars. I think we need more symbols for peace. And the Phoenix is one of these great symbols. And the Golden Rule has been restored. Couldn't the Golden Rule and the Phoenix together be a sailing fleet to say that we are all one people and that we need to stand together for peace, we need to stand together against the threats of climate change and bring this world together.
This is an American hero who took great risks and showed us something that we didn't want to know about that was there with us. I think raising the Phoenix would be an incredible thing for us to do as a memorial to Reynolds, to all he stood for, to all he worked for. And if we can raise this ship and have it be a mobile memorial to the cause that Reynolds worked for, this would be a fantastic thing.
Why would you raise the Phoenix? So it can continue what it was doing. And its life is not over. The ideas and the ideals that it stood for and sailed for are not finished because the problem is still there, and the problem has not been solved.